understandable, memorable, and emotional. He's here to enlighten us, ladies and gentlemen. Please give it up for Carmine Gallo.
Hey. Thank you. All right, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Parish Group for giving me this opportunity to share some of these ideas with you today. And I think that these principles that we're going to talk about are principles that will help you think differently about your own companies, about your brands, and about how you communicate the vision behind those brands. The books that I've been focusing on now have to do with the man who is everything about innovation. There is no person more closely associated with innovation than Steve Jobs. He is the classic entrepreneur, a guy who started his company in the spare bedroom of his parents' house, and that is where it started. It did not start in the garage. It started in the bedroom with him and Wozniak. That bed is where they signed the papers on April 1st, 1976 to create Apple. Only when they outgrew the bedroom did they move to the garage. So what I want to talk to you about today are some of the principles that have driven Apple's success. But these are principles that I've talked to many, many companies who consciously or unconsciously apply some of the same principles. But I want you to understand something. Innovation, by definition, means a better way of doing things, a new way of doing something that results in positive change. That's what innovation is. A new way of doing something that results in positive change. So here are some of the principles. Let's go through number one. The first principle that I want to talk about is do what you love. I'm taking all of these principles from a Steve Jobs quote because passion is everything. I think what he meant is that you cannot come up with creative, innovative ideas and technologies or services that are going to move the world forward if you are not passionate about the brand. Steve Jobs once said, "Being the richest man in the cemetery doesn't matter to me. Going to bed at night saying, we've done something wonderful. That's what matters to me." Imagine if your team, your colleagues, your employees heard you talk like that. That's the difference. But passion is very, very important to him. People with passion can change the world for the better. This guy certainly believed that. You all know who he is, James Dyson, who failed 5,126 times before creating the vacuum that never loses suction. My wife thought I was crazy when I said, we have to buy this. We have to get a Dyson. It never loses suction. And she questioned me, do other vacuums lose suction? I said, I don't know, but this is what he said. But he said something very interesting. Passion, he said, will not protect you against setbacks, but it will ensure that no failure is ever final. And that's why you've got to be passionate, because as we're going to talk about, innovation sits in a lonely place. When you come up with radical new ideas, you're going to get a lot of criticism, and it's going to be very, very hard for you to keep going. Principle number two, put a dent in the universe. Okay, this speaks to vision. Vision is very important, obviously. You got to have passion, but you also have to have a vision of where you're going. This is a fun picture. I had a wonderful opportunity once to meet one of the most famous people in the world, Neil Armstrong, first man on the moon. We had an Italian dinner. That's him, that's my brother, that's me, so I'm third from his left. This was at an Italian restaurant in California, and so one of our friends set it up. So we had hours of eating, then drinking good Italian wine. Pretty soon he started to open up, and he regaled us with stories of landing on the moon. One of those really memorable moments in your life you never forget. But being a communications guy, I was listening to the story very carefully, and he reminded us that when Neil Armstrong first landed on the moon, it took 400,000 people to get him there. Scientists, engineers, all of these other people who made it possible. And do you know what set the forces in motion, he said? A vision. Gee, imagine that. A vision by this guy, John Kennedy in 1961, who said, we are going to put a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth by the end of the decade. That was the vision. And a lot of scientists at the time said, well, that can't be done. Well, we don't have the rocket, we don't have the technology to do that. We don't have the technology to make it happen. But since you put a deadline on it, let's try. Visions need to be bold. Bold visions inspire people. Nobody wants to go to work if your vision for the company is growing earnings or growing sales by 20% this year. Okay, that doesn't inspire me. That's not a vision. A vision must be bold, consistent, concise, and specific too. As specific as you can make it. We need to do better this year. Okay, that's not specific. Landing a man on the moon, returning him safely to Earth, and we're going to do it by this date, that's specific. But vision sets forces in motion. So passion and vision go hand in hand. Okay, you can't have one without the other. You got to have passion because passion gives you energy. It gives you the fuel. But it's vision that sets the rocket to its ultimate destination. Passion fuels the rocket, but it needs to have somewhere to go. And as an employee or a team member of yours, I need to know where we're going. That's inspiring. So let's talk about principle number 3. Kickstart your brain. Steve Jobs once said, you need to kickstart your brain. What does he mean by that? Creativity. We cannot innovate, we cannot come up with new and innovative products without being really creative. Well, Steve Jobs once said that creativity is just connecting things. That sounds pretty simple. What does that mean? Harvard psychologists spent 9 years studying innovative individuals. And you know what they found? They found that the most innovative and creative people in the world are people who connect things from different fields. They simply connect ideas from different fields. Psychologists called it association. I wanted to call Harvard and tell them, you just wasted 9 years of research. You should have just talked to Steve Jobs because he's been doing this all his life. He believes that a broad set of experiences will help you recognize opportunities that other people miss. A lot of the product designs that went into Apple came from completely different industries, completely different products. Steve Jobs once walked through a Macy's store to be inspired because he said if people are going to put computers in their kitchen or in their home, what would that look like? It didn't look like computers back then. Computers were really ugly things, and they weren't in plastic, and they were horizontal and broad and wide. He said people wouldn't want that in their kitchen. What would a Cuisinart look like? You know, food processor, what would that look like? So he's always connecting ideas from different fields. There are many, many examples, but the one example I like the most, the Apple retail stores have completely changed a lot, everything we know about the retail experience. But guess what served as the inspiration for the Apple stores? The Four Seasons. Steve Jobs, Ron Johnson, who oversees retail, and a few others sat around in a conference room and they said, who offers the best customer experience? Nobody mentioned another computer store. So they said, okay, if it's not another computer store, what would it be? And somebody said, well, the Four Seasons, the beautiful hotel, everywhere you go, no matter where you go in the world, the customer service is really consistent and it's superior. So they study the Four Seasons. That's why when you walk into an Apple store, you will not find a cashier, but you will find a concierge. You even find a bar. They don't dispense alcohol, but they dispense advice. Again, connecting things from different fields. Creativity is just connecting things. But it's also surrounding yourself by people with diverse experiences. Let's go to principle number 4, very important one. Sell dreams, not products. I hate to be the one to break it to you, but your clients and your customers don't care about your product, your service. They care about themselves, right? Like we all do, right? We're pretty self-consumed as individuals. They care about their hopes, their dreams, their ambitions. Help them fulfill their dreams and you'll win them over. When Apple was on a pretty rough track in the mid-1990s, Steve Jobs said the cure for us right now is not cost cutting. The cure for Apple is to innovate its way out of its current predicament. And how is he going to do that? He was going to put the focus back on the customer and the customer's needs. Let's talk about principle number 5, though, because this will affect everything. Say no to 1,000 things. Steve Jobs once said, innovation comes from saying no to 1,000 things, to make sure we don't get on the wrong track or we try to do too much. Now, you can look at that quote and say, well, that has to do with the number of products they build. They don't make that many products. If you walk into an Apple store, there really aren't that many. For a $50 billion company, there aren't that many products. But that's not exactly what he's talking about. He's talking about the elimination of clutter in all of its manifestations. Simplicity, he said, is the ultimate sophistication. He was quoting Leonardo da Vinci, but he loves that quote. Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication. Anything that clutters the experience is eliminated. So this guy, Jonathan Ive, is one of the chief designers at Apple. In fact, you have him to thank for pretty much all of the products lately, like the iPad and the iPhone. But here's what he said about design. We are absolutely consumed at Apple. We are absolutely consumed by trying to develop a solution that is very simple, because as physical beings, we understand clarity. Simple. Your users demand simplicity. So at Apple, anything that clutters the user experience is eliminated. So what does that mean? That means that we don't need that plastic keyboard on an iPhone or on a phone. Remember, smartphones before the iPhone, they all had plastic keyboards that were fixed in plastic. They didn't move. They said, well, let's eliminate that. Every time they announce a new product, it's the elimination of clutter. What can we take away so that the focus is on the product? That takes courage, by the way. That takes a lot of courage. How many of us would have the courage to eliminate, to put the focus on what we want? That's very hard to do, because by nature we want to add things, which is why products are so hard to use and people go back to using an Apple, because they're simple and they're easy to use. A Steve Jobs presentation is simple. Product design is simple. Packaging is simple. Website is simple. Say no to 1,000 things means a lot more than just refining and limiting the number of products you offer. There was a really funny story. The new CEO of Nike, well, he was new at the time, his name was Mark Parker, said that he called Steve Jobs and he asked Steve for advice. Steve said this: get rid of the crappy stuff and focus on the good stuff. He said, you know what? At Nike, you make a lot of great stuff, but you also make a lot of crap. And Mark Parker said, well, is that? Yeah, that's great, Steve. He kind of thought it was a joke. He said, is that it? Yeah, that's it. That's simple. Get rid of the crappy stuff and focus on the good stuff. So I think that reflects and resonates with what Steve Jobs and that philosophy is all about. You got to create experiences too. Let's not forget that. You can innovate. We're talking about innovation and inspiring brands. Innovate around the customer experience. Nobody does that anymore. And yet when Apple first built the Apple stores, here's what Steve Jobs said about it. People don't want to buy personal computers anymore. They want to know what they can do with them. And we're going to show them exactly that. So they really innovated around the experience. Let me take you through the experience of buying a Mac, and let me point out a few things. I walk through the experience. This is the way they want you to walk through the experience. First, some of you don't even know this, but you can actually call ahead and schedule an appointment with a personal shopper. Where do you think they got that idea? From stores. In the US, we have a very famous store called Nordstrom, and they have personal shoppers. They're not on commission. They just help you look for the things that you need. Same with Apple. You call them up, ask for a personal shopper. So I did. And I met this young gentleman, and he said something interesting to me. He said, I'm not here on commission. I'm here to help you grow. Imagine hearing that. I'm not here on commission. I'm here to help you grow. Sounds kind of cheesy. But when you think about it, it made me feel good. It made me feel really good. I said, oh, that's terrific, because I want to grow. Help me out. What can I find? So they gave me a tour, a 1-hour tour. We want to show you around, show you all the beautiful electronics and products that we have. But he listened to me. He asked me a lot of questions. So they discovered the right computer for my needs. It wasn't what they wanted to sell me. It's let me listen to you and let's fit you with the right computer. But here's the interesting part. The very end of this process, and they do this for a reason, it's called Meet Your Mac. For 30 minutes, they schedule an appointment where they introduce you to your new Macintosh. They're always thinking, how can we improve the customer experience? And guess what? Now a lot of other companies are going to Apple, saying, can we learn something from you? Starbucks went to Apple, and they said, nah, it's a secret. We keep all this stuff secret, so sorry, we're not going to help you. But big brands want to go to them, but they're always thinking, how do I improve the customer experience? Well, you don't necessarily need to go to Apple. Why don't you go to the Ritz Carlton? The Ritz Carlton does something very, very similar. I've interviewed the CEO of the Ritz Carlton, and he too, they try to innovate around the customer experience. Of course, as you know, the Ritz Carlton is considered really the gold standard in customer service. Simon Cooper, who was the CEO at the time that I interviewed him a few years ago, said they do something very interesting. Every single day, they have a staff meeting. I said, okay, well, what's so interesting about that? You have a staff meeting well, it's every day. Maybe most people, most brands have it once a month, if at all. He said, oh, no, that's not the point. During the staff meeting, for 15 minutes, we share stories of exceptional customer service from real employees, often the people in the room, because that motivates those employees to offer even more exceptional customer service. And they're learning something at the same time. So those are actually called wow stories, and they do them every single day in every department, in every hotel around the world. So I was curious. I want to see one of these. And I went to the San Francisco Ritz Carlton. I attended one of these staff meetings, and I have rarely met a staff of more engaged employees. And these were housekeepers, minimum wage type of people. And they were engaged, and they were excited, and they were high-fiving each other, and they loved their manager. They didn't know who I was. I was just kind of a fly on the wall. But it was interesting. It was interesting. They really loved those staff meetings. Who enjoys staff meetings? But Simon Cooper said the difference is you enjoy staff meetings when you hear about yourself, when you're recognized in front of your peers, or when one of your peers is recognized. But again, that just teaches me that you can innovate around the experience. But sometimes, actually both with Apple and Ritz Carlton, you know what that tells us? It tells us that before we innovate around the experience that the customer has, we have to innovate around the experience that we train our internal employees to have. Right? It starts with our internal employees. Apple calls them our internal customers, are just as important as our external customers. Okay? Because you have to transmit inspiration somehow. And how do you inspire? It's got to be the people on the ground floor. Innovation sits in a lonely place because it takes courage to pitch radically new ideas. Imagine what one young man must have thought when he heard things like, we don't need you. You haven't gotten through college yet. Or how about this one? Get your feet off my desk, get out of here, you stink, and we're not going to buy your product. Love this one. Your problem is you believe the way to grow is to serve caviar in a world that's pretty content with cheese and crackers. Or the final one, there's no reason why anybody would want a computer in their home. Now, by now you know that all of these were directed at one time or another to Steve Jobs. But he had the power of his convictions and his ideas, even though they were dismissed by the popular media at the time and experts at the time as well. Probably the same type of people who told John Kennedy, you're crazy. But if we had to do it by the end of the decade, how would we make it happen? I'm going to leave you with one story. There was a Disney executive who was charged with revitalizing the Disney stores. So they turned to Steve Jobs, who is now Disney's largest shareholder, and he asked him for advice. And Steve Jobs had 2 words: dream bigger. I love that. That was it. That was his only advice: dream bigger. And it was up to the executive to interpret that. But that's the advice I'm going to leave you with today, especially as you attend this type of conference. Dream bigger. So thank you very much for inviting me here this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you.